Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, with permission from Luang Por Vradhammo, Chandiya, Mahateras, Teras, Samana Sangha, lay folk, I'll offer some reflections today. But first of all, I'd like to say hello to the TV audience. I think this is the first time I've been, what is it called, live. So hello. I'm a bit of a Luddite, so I'm kind of on the cusp of understanding all these things. But anyway, hi. I was coming down from Luang Por Vradhammo's kuti, who very kindly let me use his kuti. So I'm living in luxury here. And just looking at all the pathways that have been developed to get here. I lived in a monastery in New Zealand for several years, and we had similar terrain, very steep, and we built a lot of roads, and I did my knees in, by the way. But just thinking all the work that's gone into just the trails, one step, just one step is a lot of work. And then getting all the leveling, and I imagine it must be treacherous in the winter. Tremendous amount of work just in that. And then I came down, and when you come down from the sun, you're up by that golden Buddha there, and you look down, and this hive of activities going on, and I could see the books being piled up. And I got to thinking, imagine what it takes to get one of those books out. First of all, you've got to get a young man to ordain. Right? You don't have that. And then he has to go through the torture of being an anagarika in the kitchen, getting the food out. I was saying to some of the anagarikas, the kitchen is the only place in a monastery that has a deadline. It's the only place that has a kind of stress deadline. So hats off to the anagarikas, and I think most of the bhikkhus who have gone through this training have been anagarikas. I was never an anagarika. I was an anagarika for 2 hours. So I never had that training. But then just thinking about the books that you have, a monk practices and he struggles with his own stuff as an anagarika, as a samanera, learns the Vinaya, maybe learns the Patimokkha, struggles with his meditation, goes through doubts, anger, inspiration, desperation, the whole gambit of human emotions. And then maybe after 10 years he's asked to give a talk and he's panic-stricken. He doesn't want to give a talk and he struggles through that. And he starts to get the craft of speaking, begins to understand that, starts to formulate ideas from his own insights, offers that, and then one day a person says, "Oh, I like that. Can we record that?" And then someone records it, and then one person, "Oh yeah, let's do a book." And then someone has to transcribe the spoken word, right? Get it onto paper, and then 6 million people have to edit it now, I think. That's the normal. We have such a high standard of publication. So then you get all these editors and then protocols of editing. And then lay people come and they say, "Oh yeah, we'll print that too." And you get generous people from Thailand or Malaysia printing these books, and voila, we have a book. But there's a lot in it, isn't there? There's a lot of... and where it's coming from is such a good place, from the sincere aspiration of a young monk, from the inspiration of a lay community. So, you look at each of those books, it's such a treasure. I know when I started, and Luang Por Vradhammo, like if you got a mimeographed sheet of some kind of writing, all splotchy with ink, and it was like Ajahn Chah. It was like treasure. It's like treasure. There wasn't much available. Now we do live broadcasts. Huh? So there's, in the last 40 years, there's a lot been done. We live in a very, very good time in that way. I'm so grateful to be living in this time. I sometimes think of it living in the time of Ajahn Chah and Luang Por Liam too. Living in the time of these great teachers, and I feel very blessed that way. I thought I'd like to I've been pondering the old dichotomy of heart and head, so I thought I'd just sort of enter into that, see where that goes. Heart and head. So let's say there's a football coach. We're doing football now, right? World Cup. And he is training some men in football, so he's watching them run and pass and do that, and he offers criticism. He puts them through their paces, makes them run fast, or learn how to kick with both feet equally, or whatever a soccer coach might do. So he's looking at the players with a certain attitude of criticism and coaching, and trying to get some kind of a result from his players. And that's one way that we look at life. Now, what does he have to do that? He has to be present. He can't be thinking about the next game, and he can't be regretting the last game that he lost. Right? He has to be present, and he can't be preoccupied with his iPhone. He has to be looking at the players, seeing what they're doing, so he's focused. But he's focused in a particular way. He's focused in the way of trying to get a result. Right? And then maybe one of the players on the team comes to him and says he's really stressed out because his wife has pancreatic cancer. Right? Now the coach is looking at this chap in a much, much different way. He's looking at him in a receptive way, I would say, empathy. So now the player's saying, "Oh, it was really difficult. I can't focus on the game. I'm just worried about my wife." He doesn't say, "Just focus." He doesn't do that. But he listens. He's empathetic. He receives. And I think for me, this is heart and head. The way we pay attention to things, and both are necessary. For me, that the heart part is the part that is receptive, that receives. And that's the part that isn't critical. It takes in all things. And this is, I think, the idea of metta bhavana. Not metta bhavana just as may I be well, may you be well, but more as the heartfelt awareness which accepts all things. It doesn't mean you condone everything or you follow things, but there is a sense of awakening to life as it presents itself in its wholeness, not in some partiality that you would like or dislike. And then the other part, the head, I mean, that if that is used unskillfully, it can go into endless thinking, driven by anxiety, driven by criticism, and so on. And yet, right thought and right intention are an important part of our lives. So in a Buddhist sense, I think for me, the balance of bhavana is a sense of awakening with this open receptivity to the way things are. And then the critical mind can be used to bring forth the Dhamma. So the language of Dhamma is not personal. So the language of Dhamma says this will change. That's not a personal statement, right? It's a statement of nature. This will change. And it seems to me, if you don't have that awakened openness, we can jump into the present moment with some critical attitude or judgmental attitude and not really be awake to the way things are. And yet if we don't put into it Dharma, we can just get sort of drift and lost in it. Take another example, say you go out to the coast. Ajahn Pasano, Luang Por Pasano is taking me out to the coast. I was just in Desolate Sound off Vancouver Island, and that's another story. But you're looking out at the ocean, right? and maybe it's the open Pacific, and there's just the water, the sky, If you see a whale, what do? Wow, look at the whale. You get your binoculars out and you're very excited by the object, right? But if the whale's not there, and you're not a birder and you're not looking at the seagulls or whatever you're doing, and you're just there, what happens to your mind? Doesn't it go still? Don't we all like? I mean, I love that. I love that kind of stillness and space. And so what's happening there, I think that's the heart aspect. Because now you're not like criticizing the water or saying it's too wet, right? You might be criticizing the clouds, I don't know. But if you're not into that mode of critiquing the situation, and I think many of us find that, what are you doing? You're allowing the sea to kind of come to you. At least that's what I do. You're allowing the sky to be there, just as it is. And that takes you to stillness, doesn't it? It does to me. And that stillness isn't the sea. We think maybe it's the environment, and then you think, oh yeah, I'll buy a cottage by the sea, and then you're thinking again, right? Or I'll take a picture, and you're lost again. You want to hold on to it, but before you make it, before you do anything about it, say, before you think about it or make a decision about it, whatever, there is this receptive quality. And that takes you to stillness. So when we don't emphasize the object, and we emphasize this receptive knowing, I think we intuit the natural stillness, which is always available. But that's very, very difficult because we're so preoccupied with thought, with emotions, with our duties and our responsibilities. And this endless preoccupation is a very difficult one to extricate oneself from. So take something more difficult, let's say. So that nature, or maybe I can just riff on Ajahn Sona's thing about beauty. He gave a lovely talk this afternoon, or this morning, was it? This morning. But like, the way I look at beauty, say like if you look at that Buddha image. Now, if I look at that with a critical eye, I can analyze it. It's made of sandstone. Boy, that must be heavy. Oh yeah, Nyaniko, that's a beautiful base you made there. Yeah, those flowers. And then I might like it, I might dislike it. So I'm making comment about it, aren't I? Right? But the point of the Buddha image to me is the awakened mind, rather than the critical mind. So what if I look at that Buddha image without a kind of an aesthetic sense, and I just allow the image to come to me? What do I have to do? I have to stop thinking and analyzing, criticizing. And I just have to let the image, as it were, appear in consciousness. And if I do that, I'm taken by the stillness rather than the object. And that to me is awake. That to me is what represents Buddha. Now, if I painted the Buddha at night time, I painted the lips red, I'd get thrown out of the Sangha, and I'd lose the kuti, I'm sure. But then I'd look at it, right, and I'd say, that's pretty kitsch, right? Red lips, and I painted the hair blue. But then I could also look at my aversion. Couldn't I? Couldn't I just say, oh, aversion feels this way, and I could talk, we could call the police or whatever we do. But I could look at aversion in the same way and see aversion is in consciousness. I could know aversion, and I could just witness it as something that arises and ceases. And that would take me to stillness too, isn't it? And that's more difficult because it's loaded. It's loaded with what I want. I don't want the Buddha to be like that. I want it to be a certain aesthetic way. But I could do that if I was on my game, as it were. So so I found very, very useful in my own training is to make exercises of shall we call them receptivity? To just take natural objects. And beauty has a particular way of calming the mind. And I think Ajahn Sona was referring to that. But beauty, when it becomes ownership, becomes idolatry. So I don't idolize the Buddha. I don't want to own it. I let the beauty of it just enter, and I know it. And then, because I'm not making a comment, I'm taken to the stillness. I think this is what art can do. I don't know if Ajahn Sona would agree with that, but I think it has its place. But we must also learn to do that with ugliness. Right? Because if you can't do it with ugliness, then you're just you're not with life, because life has beauty and ugliness. But there is something about the sea, the open spaces, a beautiful shrine room, a beautiful Buddha that really helps us in that way. But it's not about this. It's about this, isn't it? It's about the quality, at least I think so. So take something, say maybe more real, or not real, but let's say you feel disappointed. Right? Let's say you've applied for the Thanksgiving retreat, and there's now I understand there's a lottery, right? And you've gotten on, you're waiting, what is it, like 12:05, you can punch in, and you punched in at 12:05, 30 seconds, it's already full. Or no, you get in. Let's say you get in. Okay, you're in for the retreat, and you've been dreaming about this. And the last two retreats, you couldn't get in because it's overbooked. And now, finally, you've got it. And then you get pneumonia. Not good. And you feel disappointed, right? So, disappointment, if you understand the sense of receptivity with the disappointment, right, and you bear witness to disappointment as an object, that's harder to do because your desire system now wants life to be different than it is. It doesn't want the pneumonia, it wants the retreat. And so thinking goes into overdrive about how you shouldn't have gone outside and got cold, how maybe they'll take me in a stretcher or whatever. But you don't really awaken to disappointment. You don't really make it conscious. And this is one of the principles that Lopo Sumedho has been very helpful in teaching me. Make things conscious. How do you make something conscious? So disappointment, how do you let that become conscious? Not through thought, because thought is not disappointment. It's different, isn't it? Angry thoughts are certainly driven by anger, but the feeling of anger is something that is before thought. So how do I become fully conscious of something like disappointment? Invitation, receptivity. And what happens if I do that? And I put into the thinking mind, I say, this will change. It will, guaranteed, this will change. What happens? Well, the disappointment lasts as long as the intensity of the loss, right? It depends on the intensity of the loss or whatever. But you bear witness to it. And then it's unpleasant, but it's not really suffering. It's just unpleasant. That's all. And disappointment is made fully conscious, but you don't run with it with thought, because that's the very problem. You run and I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have done that. That's not really being fully conscious of disappointment. And this happens, doesn't it? You kind of know you're disappointed, but you're running with the thinking, but you're not really fully conscious of the disappointment. Right? So to be fully conscious of something, you have to allow it to be there. And I think this is what Metta Bhavana is about, isn't it? It's not just about me loving cougars or whatever people love, but it's rather about awareness being imbued with a sense of open receptivity. Huh? But not in a naive or sentimental way. That's not where we're going. So, if like I can think of my own kind of examples of that, the difficulty of bearing with something which is not so straightforward was when my mother died. The last 4 days, I was with her for a long time, but the last 4 days were very, very difficult. I'm not a medical person, and Mom refused to go to the doctor. I said, okay, it's your call. And the doctor said, go to the hospital. And no, okay, so the doctors came. I'm not going to the hospital, okay. She was very lucid, so I did my best. And in that 4 days, in day 3, I realized I had made a medical mistake. Understandable, but I had bound her legs too tight, and I hadn't. It's a very stressful thing. But then, having seen that I made this medical mistake, the feeling in my heart was awful. You take care of your mom to the best you can, and then you do it. Now, I hadn't done it intentionally. I hadn't said, I'm going to wreck Mom's leg. That's a good idea. I think it wasn't that. It was just a situation. But it didn't really matter because the emotional impact of seeing my mother in even more pain as she's dying was, it was really, really horrible. So when Mom died, what do you think the memories were? Right? The memories were of this horrible thing. Now, fortunately, I understood that this is memory. And because I understood as memory, although it was horrible, it was very, very unpleasant, I could see that the suffering was different, and that was the thought. The thought. And where the thought was going was towards self-disparagement and guilt. Self-flagellation. I said, no way, no. And I had to be very strict with myself, because that was the natural pattern. But the feeling of the memory of that lived with me quite strongly for the first 2 or 3 months. It would come up almost every hour, and then it slowly faded over the year. Right? Now, there was nothing wrong with that. It was neither right nor wrong. It was the way it was. And so that if I had thought that the practice was somehow not having that feeling, I'd be a mess. But the feeling was natural. It was Dharma. And then someone said to me, but you took such good care of your mother. And they didn't understand that wasn't the issue. I know I took good care of my mother. But the issue was this memory was so very powerful. And then to bear witness to it, I had to keep coming back. Yeah, but it's like this. It belongs. And so Ajahn Sumedho's teaching on that has been brilliant for me. He uses two phrases quite often. He says, it's like this, and it belongs. And they're very profound if you don't just take it intellectually as some kind of tautology, but you just take, it's like this. And that's receptivity. And it belongs. It belongs. And so I was able to, it's a very, very unpleasant experience. But then we get unpleasant physical experiences. You get a abscess in your foot, or you get leukemia or whatever. So the negative emotional experiences they're much more difficult to deal with. And I found that the more I can awaken to them in this heartfelt sense, in the sense of receptivity, then I can bear witness to it. And in the bearing witness to it, I begin to see cessation. And this is for me, a very important word. In the models of Buddhism that, excuse me, I'm a bit thirsty. In the teachings that I've kind of gleaned from different readings and so on, I never found the teachings on warfare very helpful. So you find those kind of metaphors used in Buddhism, like kill the kilesa, or, fight Mara. I found that my mind was already pretty driven, and that didn't work for me. Or uprooting the kilesa. That never worked for me either. It works for some. And so I think in the development of your own practice, you do have to develop your own metaphors and your own language which works for you. I know once I used the word defilement to someone who is a recovering Roman Catholic, and they found the word defilement, they couldn't take it. Because it had it's not that it was wrong, it's just they had all kinds of baggage around that. Another person, I used the word abandonment. They had been abandoned as a child. It wasn't a positive, right? And this is just language. This is just words, right? So I think it's very important to see that our spiritual life is composed of multiple insights. It's not just kind of kazam, you're enlightened. It's like multiple insights. You see more deeply into the patterning of your mind and the Buddha's recommendations about non-attachment or whatever. And that insight is, I think, what I would consider to be intuition. You kind of, like if you're meditating, you really try too hard for 5 years. And then after 10 years, you kind of have a balance, and someone says you should try harder. No. No, I shouldn't. I know. And that's intuition, isn't it? You know how hard you have to try or how much effort you should put forth. And I think that comes from a lot of insights. Little by little, you understand what it means to let go, to be a good person, or whatever. And I would suggest that you develop language around that. Rather than just take scriptural language, which can be helpful, I think we all do actually, you develop language which fits your insights. So Luang Por Vradhammo says it's like this. And some people say, I've heard that a million times, doesn't mean anything to me, or it all belongs. And then someone says to me, oh, he's condoning violence. But no, he has some insight, and he coins it in certain ways. So what are your insights, right? What is your understanding of Dharma? And how can you introduce, in Thai language or whatever, how can you introduce language which reminds you of your own insights? And that's not the same as reproducing an experience. You're not kind of reproducing some experience of samadhi. No, that's greed. This isn't greed. This is about recollection. Like just the language, this will change. You recollect. It's true. This will change. So maybe you're getting upset about something and you've worked that through. Oh, this will change. That's right thinking, isn't it? Right thought. But it's not just boilerplate Buddhism. It's not like you're just doing the party line. It's sincere. It's coming from insight. So for me, the language which works better than, say, warfare language, killing, like killing, kilesa, and so on, I found the ideas of cessation, things ending, to be much more fruitful, much more helpful. I should think that's to a great extent from Luang Por Vradhammo's recommendations to me. So just like having faith in anicca, seeing something like disappointment arise, and seeing that this the nature to arise and cease, and then being fully conscious with it until it ceases. And that insight has been very important for me because, yeah, that's true. It did end. And then the peace that comes from the ending of that is different than the peace of distraction, or running away, or doing anything about it. See, it's the peace of the background, of the stillness, which is always there. And then the faith and the trust, and then the language of that becomes more and more imbued with that insight. Yeah, that does work. And then so over time, say one of the things I talk a lot about is fear and anxiety. And if you've heard some of my podcasts, you're bored with it, but I suffered a lot from fear and anxiety, and in ways which are ridiculous. Just like, as I say, I was afraid to answer the phone. If the phone rang, I ran into a cupboard. What? And yet there it was, this deep fear and anxiety. Through what? Through, I didn't know why. I had good parents, so karma, whatever. But it was there. It was there. And then the struggle with that was always, the struggle was not that the fear was wrong, it was the desire to get rid of the fear. Not that the disappointment is wrong, it's the desire not to have the disappointment. Not that the anger is wrong, it's the desire to either follow it or repress it, right? And that nuance, that difference is very important. That takes you back to the Four Noble Truths. So I found with like that insight into fear and anxiety, it took a few years of battling and fighting kilesa and doing metta bhavana and doing mantra, but never really becoming fully conscious of fear. What is it? Thinking about it, trying to do something about it. And so before fixing it, what is it? And it's like this. It feels like that. And then as I did that, and I began to see, it ceased over the years, and then I saw that not only does it cease in the moment, then the amplitude and volume and frequency of fear began to cease as well, right? And why? Because I was no longer fueling it with fearful thoughts. What was I doing? If you think about stream of consciousness, what was I doing? I was offering kindness to fear. So in stream of consciousness, fear rises, and then there's a receptivity, there's openness, there's allowing. And that mindset is metta, isn't it? Metta bhavana. But not like, oh, fear, may you be well and happy. It was receptive, open mind. Huh? And that was the intention then being put into stream of consciousness. And so in stream of consciousness, certainly fear had the energy to arise, but because it was no longer fed with fearful egotistic thoughts, it was known as a bodily sensation, as trembling or whatever it might be. And then what was put into it was kindness, 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 kindness. And so the energy of fear died away, and the vibrancy of kindness started to dominate. And that kind of way of something ceasing and something beautiful being manifest is something that, for me, took a long time. Took a long, long time. There's a lot of like feelings of being totally pathetic, right? But then my teachers would say, no, this will change. This will change. Don't take it personally. So Ajahn Sumedho's constant, when we were at, I've had this great gift of many good teachers, and when we were in Chithurst, Luang Por Sumedho would constantly just give very, very direct talks about the awakened mind. He'd be doing plumbing and all kinds of hard work, and constantly just awake, just keep doing that, awaken the mind to the way things are. And that's what I mean by being fully conscious, fully awake to the way things are. And then from that, decisions can be made. From that, discernment functions, right? So discernment is important. So if I'm doing something which is exacerbating the fear or whatever, then discernment say, no, don't go that path. So that's fine. Discernment's fine. But I think if it doesn't come from this open heart and head, I think it's misappropriated. Discernment becomes aversion. Discernment becomes self-judgment. Discernment becomes self-criticism or self-hatred. I had it was about 2 months ago, I have an unfortunate habit of sometimes using humor in cutting ways. And now I'm so tender around these things that I poked someone in a way that was, it wasn't like gross, but it wasn't kind. It wasn't coming from a good place. And as soon as I saw their face, I realized, and then I realized my mindset, I hadn't been aware. And then what was interesting was, then I went to my kuti, and my heart was in such vibrant, I guess not pain, but it was like really difficult to stay with it, and yet it was compassion. And that was remorse. Remorse is compassionate, isn't it? And where my thinking mind wanted to go, thought mind wanted to go to self-hatred. Right? Guilt. They wanted to go to guilt. And that was really interesting, just watching how compassion wants to arise, and what's starting to dominate it is hatred, self-hatred, self-disparagement. And I really had it and I was just stay with the heart, stay with the heart. And so I felt much more compassionate. And the person didn't even know I said anything when I asked them. So it didn't really matter, but I knew. And I think there's something about our capacity to relate to each other from empathy, which is not sentimental. I think it's very calm and very centered. And the cynic finds this difficult. The cynic thinks that metta bhavana is sentimentality and naivete and just being silly. But it's not. It's not. The sentimental person is thinking a lot too, in sentimental ways. The cynic is thinking, but this is not thought, I would say. It's not thought. It's open receptivity of the heart. And so the teachings, the analysis that we have in Buddhism gives us discernment, but also how do we awaken? And I think these exercises of taking the normal, these lovely lampshades, you look at that lampshade and say, oh, I could make that. And then I'd start making it. And then I'd be thinking, which is not illegal. But then I could look at it, and I could let the lampshade come to me, and that would take me to stillness. And I think that's the exercise that we miss in our culture. The exercises of distraction, we're good at that, of doing and becoming. But the exercise of stillness, knowing, in very simple ways, pays great dividends. It really does. Because then, when the difficult comes up, when the horrible memory comes up, or the disappointment comes up, you've established a ground where, oh, this is all right. It feels this way, and it goes through you, and it ceases. All right, I'll leave that for your reflection. Sadhu, sadhu.